The handouts or review materials must be treated with utmost confidentiality. It shall be the responsibility of the person whose name appears therein that the handouts or review materials are not photocopied or in any way reproduced, shared, or lent to any person or disposed in any manner. Any handouts or review materials found in the possession of another person whose name does not appear therein shall be prima facie evidence of violation of RA 8293. Top-notch review materials are updated every 6 months based on the current trends and feedback. Please buy all recommended review books and other materials.
Welcome back to the part 2 of histology. This time, we are going to talk about the system-based approach to histology, beginning with the circulatory system. Hopefully, with the basic types of tissues, mas madali na natin maintindihan to because we'll just be discussing one by one yung component of the different organs. Okay? So, alam naman natin, di ba, na ang circulatory system is the one that pumps and directs blood cells and substances carried in blood to all tissues of the body. So, it contains heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. So, we have two circulation here, pulmonary circulation where blood is oxygenated. And then we have the systemic circulation where blood brings nutrients and removes waste in the tissues. Now, these are the different structures with their functions. The heart, which propels the blood through the circulatory system. We have the arteries, series of vessels, efferent, no? Because it's away from the heart, it becomes smaller as they branch into the various organs, carry blood to the tissues. Then we have the veins from the conversions of your venules into a system of larger channels, like your superior and inferior vena cava, which they carry the blood towards the heart to be pumped again. And then we have the capillaries, physiologically important because it is the smallest vessel. That is the site for the carbon dioxide, oxygen, nutrient, and waste product exchange between the blood and tissues. Important histologically, dapat alam natin yung walls of the heart chambers, beginning with the endocardium. Your endocardium consists of the lining endothelium, okay? And it has a supporting layer for your fibroelastic connective tissue with scattered smooth muscle. Now, a deeper layer of connective tissue here is what we call the subendocardial layer. It is continuous with that of the myocardium, okay? So this is your endocardium and this is your subendocardial layer. Later on, you'll appreciate that in the subendocardial layer, this is where some of the conducting system of the heart is located, like your Purkinje fiber. Now, your myocardium naman consists mainly of your typical contractile cardiac cells or cardiomyocytes. They are arranged spirally around each heart chamber. Your myocardium is the thickest layer in respect of the walls of the heart chambers. Specifically, your ventricles, no, your left ventricle is much thicker than your right ventricle because it has a higher workload. So, thicker yung kanyang cardiac muscle cells. Now, next, after your endocardium, we have the epicardium. Your epicardium is a layer of your simple squamous mesothelium. Going back to our basic discussion, kapag mga lining of your cavities, most likely that is a mesothelium. It has a supporting loose connective tissue. This time naman, it's your subepicardial layer. Your subepicardial layer consists of your coronary blood vessel and nerves. No? Important this time, dapat alam nyo na yung mga different coronary arteries and their branches. Your epicardium corresponds to the visceral layer of your epicardium. Important, no? Your pericardium has a sac which contains your pericardial fluid and is important in the lubrication, especially when the heart is pumping. And then we have the parietal pericardium. This is the reflection of your epicardium. Important siya because it is a site where your large vessels enter and leave the heart. Important din in cardiac histology, alam nyo yung cardiac skeleton. So, syempre, skeleton, tissue. Dense, irregular connective tissue siya, primarily in the endocardium. And it forms part of your interventricular and interatrial septa, structure that separates your different heart chambers. Important cardiac skeleton kasi siya ang anchoring it anchors your heart valves, no? Attached to the chordae tendineae, you should know that. And then, insertion din siya ng cardiac muscle and coordination of the heartbeat by acting as an electrical insulation between the atria and ventricle. Diba, you know naman, when we talk about the components of the conduction ng heart, you have your SA node and then there will be a nodal delay. Important yon na electrical insulation because it gives a time for your ventricles to fill blood. So go back to your physiology para ma-review nyo yung inyong cardiac cycle. Now, your conducting system of the heart is different from your cardiomyocyte itself, no? Kasi it's a modified cardiac muscle cells. It is found within the subendocardial layers discussed earlier and to the adjacent myocardium. Ano bang function nito? It propagates waves of depolarization which makes a rhythmic contraction. So, ano ba yung mga components na yon? We have our SE node, AV node, bundle of His, and Purkinje fibers. So, important to note here yung mga locations, baka matanong. Buzzword, pacemaker, SE node. Okay, AV node it is on the floor of the right atrium near the AV valve. And then your AV bundle is a specialized bundle of cardiac muscle fibers. And then your Purkinje fibers located in the apex of the heart. Pag-usapan naman natin yung mga vascular wall. Lahat ng blood vessel except the capillaries contain smooth muscle and connective tissue. Kaya syempre kasama na doon yung lining endothelium. So again, capillaries sobrang nipis na niyan. Actually, endothelium na lang because it will aid you to faster diffusion of your nutrients and your gases. So let's begin with the endothelium. Your endothelium is a specialized epithelium, lining epithelium. It acts as a semi-permeable barrier between two major compartments, your blood and your IF or interstitial fluid. The shape of your endothelium is squamous, polygonal, and elongated. What is the function of your endothelium? It has a non-thrombogenic surface. No? It controls your clot formation, regulate local vascular tone and blood flow, okay, and stimulates smooth muscle contraction. And it has a role in inflammation and local immune response through your ribopallid bodies. Okay, and then also secrete your interleukins. And your endothelium promotes your cell proliferation through the secretion of your growth factors, such as your VEGF or your vascular endothelial growth factor, and you have some angiopoietins that stimulate formation of the vascular system. That's what you call vasculogenesis and promote your angiogenesis, formation of your new vessels. Now, in the tissue of the vascular wall, you also have smooth muscle. Okay, except lang saan sa capillaries. Important siya in the regulation of blood flow because it has constriction, dilation, and the control of blood pressure. Now, in arterioles and small arteries, the smooth muscle cells are connected by many more gap juncture nexus. Di ba nga, as stated earlier, important in the synchrony of the contraction of the smooth muscle. It also has a connective tissue. Ano yung composition niya? Think, may collagen fibers, elastic fibers for the elasticity, and then you have your ground substance, no, your proteoglycans and your hyaluronate, which contributes to the permeability of that connective tissue. So this is the most important part, no, yung mga layers or the tunics of the large vessel. Beginning with your tunica intima or yung pinaka-inside, it consists of your endothelium and your subendothelium. And then here it separates with the internal elastic lamina. Again, this one responsible for the elasticity of the vascular wall. And then we have the tunica media, the thickest, which has a concentric or pabilog na layer ng smooth muscle cells. And externally, you have your adventitia here. Okay? Your A, tunica externa or adventitia, and it has a type 1 collagen and elastic fibers because more of support. Okay? It has autonomic nerve fibers that releases your norepinephrine. Again, what are the layers of your larger vessels? Your intima, media, and adventitia or externa. Important din itong vasa vasorum. It is the vessels of the vessel. If our tissues or organs have blood vessels, syempre kailangan ng mga blood vessels natin, meron ding vessels. So usually your large vessels have your vasa vasorum. Arterioles, capillaries, and venules that is located in the adventitia and outer part of the media. So you have smaller arterioles, capillaries, and venules. Okay? Ang large veins commonly have more vasa vasorum than arteries because they carry the oxygenated blood. So it's physiological then. Remember, vasa vasorum, vessels of the vessels. So let's begin with the different vasculature, no? Pinakamalaki tayo, or your arteries, no? Type of arteries, we have your elastic arteries. This is in the aorta, pulmonary artery, and their largest branches. Your elastic arteries are also known as your conducting arteries because they're the major artery that carry blood to the smaller arteries. Next to that, we have your muscular arteries. These are also known as your distributing arteries because they distribute blood to all organs and they regulate the blood pressure and flow. And then your small arteries, they don't have vasa vasorum because yung diffusion ng oxygen and nutrients sa sobrang nipis naman ng mga arteries na yun, nakakapag-diffuse na. Alright? Thicker and larger vessels lang yung merong mga vasa vasorum. Then let's go to your arterioles. This is the smallest arterial branch. No intimal connective tissue or smooth muscle. It has absent elastic lamina, and this is the major determinant of systolic blood pressure. Muscle tone keeps arterioles partially closed. Indicates at the beginning of an organ's microvasculature. No? So when you see an arteriole, this is the beginning of transitioning to your microvasculature. Now, syempre, since we are talking about your microvasculature, importante dyan ang capillary bed. It is a network of smallest blood vessel. Okay, and regulate your metabolic exchange. And then your capillary beds are supplied by your terminal arteriole. That will branch into your meta-arteriole. Your meta-arteriole now acts as a precapillary sphincters that control the blood flow into the capillary. Okay, so ito yung first nun. Arteriole, meta-arteriole. Now, there are different types of capillaries. So, most common type is your continuous type. Meron siyang well-developed occluding junctions. Going back, di ba, ito yung mga adhesion points natin, especially between different epithelial cells. So, ang continuous capillary, saan siya nakikita? Muscles, connective tissue, lungs, exocrine glands, and nervous tissue. So, this is a type of your continuous capillary. Wala siyang fenestration, walang butas. Okay? And then this is your basement membrane. Siyempre, nakahiga dyan. On top of that is your endothelium. Next type of your capillary is your fenestrated capillary. They have sieve-like structure, butas-butas. Okay? More extensive ito because it allows molecular exchange across the endothelium. Now, just think of it. Why are you gonna allow ions to exchange in this type of capillary? Because it's important. Where? In the kidney, intestines, choroid plexus, and endocrine glands. No, for the maintenance of our homeostasis. And then, we have the sinusoids. Ito yung pinakamalaki ang mga butas. Your discontinuous capillaries permit maximal exchange of macromolecules, allow easier movement of cells between tissues and blood. So, endothelium has a large perforations, as you can notice in this picture, without a diaphragm and irregular intracellular clefts. Important siya saan? Doon sa mabilis ang turnover like your liver, spleen, and bone marrow, kung saan maraming cells ang pumapasok in and out. Okay? So those are your different types of capillaries. Most common again is your continuous type of capillary. Now let's go to your vein. Vein carries the oxygenated blood back to the heart. Ang characteristics niya, thin ang tunica intima, thin din ang media. Pero thick and well-developed naman ang adventitia layer. Okay? And it has venous valves. These are intimal projection with elastic fibers lined by endothelium which keep the flow of the blood, venous blood, directed towards the heart. Kasi nga, since lesser yung kanyang media, yung contractile property niya is not that enough to propel the blood back to the heart. So, important ang venous valves. Again, venous valves. Now, let's go smaller, your venules. No? Transition from capillaries to venules occur at the post-capillary venules. Importante ang post-capillary venules kasi ito yung primary site kung saan yung WBC nyo ay nag-adhere sa inyong endothelium and leave the circulation, goes through the tissue, and it converges to a larger collecting venules. So again, post-capillary venule, site of your diapedesis, of your WBCs. Then small to medium veins closely located to the corresponding muscular arteries. Ang large veins yun naman, they have your big venous trunks paired with your elastic arteries close to the heart. Then syempre, yung pinakamalaki na yung inferior and superior vena cava. So let's move on to your blood. Your blood actually is a specialized connective tissue also, but it's important to be discussed right after the circulatory system. Okay, it consists of cells and fluid extracellular material, which we call our plasma. Okay, average adult uh, volume of blood is 5 liters. Ang important cells dito is your erythrocytes or your red blood cells, your leukocytes or your white blood cells, and then your thrombocytes or your platelets. So what is the function of your blood? It is a distributing vehicle, transportation of your oxygen and carbon dioxide, metabolites, hormones, not throughout the body, nutrient distribution, waste collection, heat distribution, hindi lang adipose tissue yon ha, regulation of body temperature, and maintenance of acid-base and osmotic balance. Take note of the last bullet. Minsan kasi nakakalimutan. So this is the composition of your whole blood. You have your plasma, 55%, which has your water, proteins, no, nandiyan yung mga most common like your albumin and then other solutes. Then we have here your erythrocyte, 44% of the whole blood, and then your buffy coat. Your buffy coat is seen after centrifugation, which less than 1% of your whole blood. So buffy coat, nandoon yung ating mga white blood cells or leukocytes. Let's begin discussing the erythrocyte. Your erythrocyte lacks a nuclei and completely filled with your O2 carrying protein hemoglobin. It is biconcave in shape, which provides a large surface to volume ratio. Buhay niya 120 days, and then yung mga lola mo na RBC, senescent RBCs will be recognized and removed from the circulation mainly by the macrophages, kidney, spleen, liver, and bone marrow. Now, in small blood vessels, we have what you call the stacking up of your RBCs, and this is what you call the Rolu formation. Again, Rolu formation. Now, after your RBC, we have our WBCs, leukocytes. They are migrating transient cells because they can leave the blood and migrate to the tissue where post-capillary venules, no, your diapedesis. And it's really important because they are the one who's active in the immune system. So we have different types of leukocytes, those that will with granules and those without or less granules, I mean. So let's discuss first yung mga granulocytes. So they are filled with granules, specifically your azurophilic granules and some specific granules. And ano yon? Mnemonic natin sa mga granulocytes, your BEN, your basophil, eosinophil, and neutrophils. Now let's start with your neutrophils, also known as your PMNs or your polymorphonuclear leukocytes. They are multi-lobe, usually 2 to 5 lobes linked by a thin nuclear extension. Tapos may sausage-shaped nucleus, no? Drumstick shape, and usually it's associated with the X chromosome, female. Okay, and then we have hypersegmented neutrophils. Yun naman usually may mga 5 lobes. Okay, so usually this is the first leukocyte that is present in the site of infection or inflammation. Half-life nila 6 to 8 hours in the blood, pero ang lifespan nila is 1 to 4 days kapag nasa connective tissue na. Next is your eosinophil. Going back, neutrophil na bacterial infection. Eosinophil, same size as your neutrophil or sometimes slightly larger. This time naman, it is bilobe nucleus. Lifespan much longer than your neutrophil, 1 to 2 weeks. And you have your eosinophilic specific granules, which kills your parasitic worms or helminths. Well, common ang eosinophils, more of your helminthic infection and your allergies, eosinophils. And then your basophils, lifespan several months. Now, divided into 2 irregular lobes. They have your specific granules overlying the nucleus. Usually, obscure yung shape ng nucleus because of the granules. Now, the reason why it's called basophil because blue-loving siya. May strong basophil because of the granules present like your heparin and other glycosaminoglycans. Go! Punta naman tayo sa agranulocytes. They lack specific granules, but sinabi ko nga kanina, no, they contains azurophilic granules. Nucleus is spherical or indented, but not lobulated, like your neutrophil and eosinophil. Let's begin with your lymphocytes. This is the smallest leukocyte. Lymphocyte, okay, it has a spherical and compact nucleus. Again, this is the precursor for plasma cell. Buzzword, plasma cell, clock phase appearance, production of your antibodies. Other term of your antibody is immunoglobulins. This is the most numerous type of your agranulocytes. Okay, and then they have different functional groups. Your CD, so, ang meaning ng CD nyo, cluster of differentiation. Major classes niyan ng inyong lymphocytes, humoral immunity, more of your B lymphocytes. Okay, ayan yung precursor of your plasma cell. And then your cell-mediated immunity, ito na yung may mga cluster of differentiation like your helper T cell, CD4, no, which decreases in HIV. And then you have your cytotoxic T lymphocytes, your CD8. And then you have your natural killer or attack tumor cells. And then we have our monocyte. Ang monocyte natin, Diyos ko, sikat na sikat. Kanina pa natin pinag-uusapan. Precursor yan ng macrophage, osteoclast, and microglia. Correct? Pag-usapan natin yan. It has a large nuclei. Buzzword. It has a C-shape or kidney-shaped nucleus. C-shape, kidney-shaped, monocyte na yan. So they enter the bloodstream and circulate 12 to 100 hours, and then they enter the connective tissue where they mature to macrophages. Ano sabi nga ng mga pathologies? Your macrophages are called your histiocytes. And again, different location, they have different name. Naalala nyo pa? O, liver. Very good. Kupffer cell. Lungs. Dust cell. Very good. So, naalala naman. Okay, so next is your platelets, your thrombocytes. They are very small, non-nucleated, membrane-bound cell fragments. They are just fragments. Originate by separation from the end cytoplasmic processes of your big megakaryocytes. Your megakaryocytes is a giant polyploid bone marrow cells. Siyempre, galing sa bone marrow yan. Lifespan, 10 days. So, yung imagine yung megakaryocytes nyo, siya ay nagpuputol-putol lang into your smaller platelets. Platelets important for coagulation. Okay, let's move on to the immune system and lymphoid organs. Okay, let's continue the immune system. So, immune system is a body which provides defense or immunity against infectious agents. So, we have two overlapping types of immunity, your innate immunity and your adaptive immunity. Okay, so ang innate immunity, it is immediate, non-specific, a wide variety of effector mechanisms involved. So ang cells mo usually is the granulocytes, again, which are your basophils, eosinophils, and neutrophils. Ang innate immunity natin, so it is non-specific. Usually it's your physical barriers, no, your skin and mucous membrane, yung GI tract, respiratory, and your urogenital tract. Marami siyang chemical barriers, no, like your complement, your hydrochloric acid and organic acids, your defensins, lysozymes, and your interferons. So nice to know yung mga type of barriers like your physical and your chemical barriers. Next naman is your adaptive immunity. Ito, specific na ito. More of yung mga microbial invaders nyo, they have specific responses. Since it is specific, it is lower, especially kapag first exposure pa lang. Your adaptive immunity produces your memory cells. Your memory cells now will produce a rapid response after the initial exposure. Usually, ang mga cells here is your B and T lymphocytes, your agranulocytes, and then you have your antigen-presenting cells. Ano ngayon ang mga involved organs here? Remember this. Again, tandaan nyo kung ano yung mga primary lymphoid organs and secondary lymphoid organs. Minsan kasi natanong na yan. As simple as kung ano yung primary at secondary. Ang primary, dalawa lang, TB, primary, your thymus and your bone marrow. Ang secondary nyo, ayan yung lymph nodes, spleen, and your MALT, no, your mucosal-associated lymphoid tissue. Again, there are two types of your adaptive immunity, your humoral immunity, which refers to your antibodies or immunoglobulins. Ito yung GAMED, IgG, AMED immunity. And then your cellular immunity, these are your major player na, no? Like your B and T lymphocytes. Now, an antigen is a molecule that is recognized by cells of the adaptive immune system. And typically, kapag nagkaroon ng exposure, there will be a response. So, it may consist of soluble molecules or components of a intact cell, no, like your bacterial components, protozoan, or even your tumor cells. Your immune cells recognize and react to small molecular domains of the antigen known as your antigenic determinants or epitopes. Additional vocabulary, no, alam nyo na yan. More of related to antigen. Then your antibody is secreted by your plasma cells that arise from your B lymphocytes. Very good. You are following na. Laban, laban. Continue lang tayo. Saan nakikita ang antibodies? Blood, plasma, or your interstitial fluid. Meron din ang mga secretion of glands. Again, glands are specialized type of epithelia. Usually in the mucous, salivary, and your mammary glands. No? Oh, pumasok sa kanya yung apocrine. Merocrine, holocrine. Okay, sige. Kapag nakalimutan, reviewin lang. Okay? Now, automatic, alam naman natin na kapag secretions, when talking about immunoglobulins, it is automatically your type A or your IgA immunoglobulin. So this is the basic structure of an immunoglobulin or an antibody. Okay? So you have your two identical light chains, this one. And then you have your two identical heavy chains bound by your disulfide bond. Again, disulfide bond. You have your Fc portion or your fragment crystallizable portion, and then you have your Fab portion or your fragment antigen binding portion. So this is your Fab and this is your Fc. Okay, so this was also discussed in physio by, I think, Doc Broly, no? So please remember that. Now, your cells of your adaptive immunity, you have your B lymphocytes. They directly binds to your antigen. Now, after activation with the help of your T cells, it becomes your plasma cells. Your plasma cells then secrete your antibodies for humoral immunity. Now, some of your B lymphocytes, rather than becoming a plasma cell, they will become your memory B cells, which will make the response of the adaptive immunity faster. Okay, and then you have your T lymphocytes. They are long-lived cells and make up about 75% of the circulating lymphocytes. They utilize your MHC or your major histocompatibility complexes. So there are different types of your T cells. Helper T cells, no, your CD4, they use your MHC class 2, and then your cytotoxic T cells or CD8 also utilizes your MHC class 2, and they directly attaches to the cell. Kaya nga sila cytotoxic, no, T cells. They are the ninjas of the adaptive immunity. Okay, so ayun na yung types of immunity natin. Pag-usapan naman natin yung mga primary lymphoid organs, beginning with your thymus. Okay, so this is the organ where your T cells develop. Okay, and then the main function of the thymus is induction of the central tolerance, immunity to self-antigens. Your lymphoblasts from the bone marrow go to the thymus for maturation, becoming your T cells. There are two regions of your thymus. Again, two regions, your cortex and your medulla. Diba, alam naman natin yung cortex, usually that's the outer part, medulla is the inner part. Tandaan nyo lang guys, ha? Sa cortex, nandoon yung thymic epithelial cells and your thymocytes, no? Or your T lymphoblasts, other term kapag nasa thymus. Sa medulla, meron pa ring thymic epithelial cells. Pero, ito yung tatandaan nyo na laging lumalabas. Ano ngayon ang nakikita sa thymus? Your Hassel corpuscles. Pag narinig mo yung Hassel corpuscles, thymus na yon. Mas magaling ka dahil nag-top notch ka. Specifically, which part of the thymus? It's in the medulla. At ang Hassel corpuscles nyo, this one, yung mga yan, they are just the aggregates of your thymic epithelial cells. Nagkakaintindihan? Ayun lang po ang importante sa thymus. It is a primary lymphoid organ, and it has your Hassel corpuscles in the medulla of the thymus. Next is your MALT or your mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. This is a secondary lymphoid structure. Okay, ang components nito, you have your lymphocytes. You have your IgA secreting plasma cells. Kasi nga naman ang mucosa, no? Major functions for secretion. It has your antigen presenting cells for protection, and then lymphoid nodules. We will discuss your lymph nodes later. Also, sample of your mouth is your tonsils. Your Peyer's patches where in the ileum. Your ileum is where in the small intestine. Pangatlo siya after the duodenum, jejunum, and then your ileum. And then you have your appendix. Collectively, your mouth is one of the largest lymphoid organs, containing up to 70% of all the body's immune cells. Okay, so that is your mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Now let's discuss it one by one, like your tonsils. Earlier, no, sa anatomy nyo, na-discuss na yung tonsils. Now, you have here your lymphoid tissue collection, no, your Waldeur's ring. There are three types. There are palatine tonsils, your lingual tonsils, and your pharyngeal tonsils. I want you to focus more here sa lymph nodes kasi marami ang nalilito dito. Your lymph node is a secondary lymphoid structure. Well, as you can notice at the shape, it is bean shape. Yung iba, sinasabi it's kidney shape. It is found along the part of the lymphatic vessels. So it has three distinct regions. You have your cortex, the outer side, and then your paracortex, middle, and your medulla, yung pinakaloob. Pero ano yung mga kailangan mong tandaan dito, no? Yung mga locations ng mga certain cells. For example, your cortex here, okay? This is where your subscapular sinus is located. And then you have your lymphoid nodules. Your lymphoid nodules specifically reach in your B lymphocytes. They have two parts, your germinal center and your mantle zone. Again, your germinal center and your mantle zone. That's your cortex. So pag tinanong saan located ang germinal centers and mantles, it's in the cortex. Now your paracortex, wala siyang nodules as you can see here in the picture. Okay, it is the region between the cortex and the medulla. Pero dito, you have your high endothelial venules. And usually, this is the entry point for most of the circulating lymphocytes in the paracortex. Isipin mo na lang yung jeep, para, okay, because this is the entry point. Ang layo, no? Ayan, kaya nyo na yan kung anong analogy yung pwedeng isipin. And then you have your medulla where you have your medullary cords, and your medullary sinus. Your medullary cords contains your T and B lymphocytes, and it has many plasma cells. And then you have your medullary sinuses, which is your final lymph filter. Okay, so alam naman natin, di ba, that we have the lymph flow usually it will enter in the afferent lymph vessels. Ayan, afferent lymphatic vessels, and then it will go to your subscapular sinus, and then it will go to your cortical sinus, and then into the medullary sinus to the efferent lymphatic vessel. So, ganun yung lymph flow niya. So, after that, we have the spleen, a secondary lymphoid organ also. It has the largest single accumulation of lymphoid tissue. Okay, and the only lymphoid organ involved in the filtration of blood. Okay, napag-usapan na natin kanina yon. And then, main site of old erythrocyte destruction and the production site of antibodies and activated lymphocytes. So dito, importante pag-usapan natin yung parenchyma o yung laman ng spleen. This is what you call the splenic pulp. This was asked last March 2023. So there's two component. You have your white pulp and your red pulp. Mas marami ang red pulp, 80%. White pulp, 20%. Ang white pulp nyo, meron siyang lymphoid nodules. And we have here your periarteriolar lymphoid sheets or pulse. Remember that. It is a sheet of immune cells around the central arteriole. So here, as you can see, no, you have your white pulp here, you have your capsule extending to become your trabecula, and then you have your white pulp here. Kaya konti lang, mas marami ang red pulp. Ano yung tinanong last March? It's your splenic cords of Billroth. Saan daw siya makikita? In the spleen. Specifically, red pulp. No? Your splenic cords is important in the removal of your old RBCs. Now, Your red pulp also consists of your blood-filled sinusoids, and these sinusoids are lined by your endothelial cells called stave cells. Baka lang din matanong kung saan makikita ang stave cells. It's in your splenic pulp, specifically in your red pulp. Pulsed white pulp, splenic cords of Milrod to red pulp. That is your spleen. Let's go to your digestive tract. Okay, so your digestive tract consists of the oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, plus the associated glands. Ano yon? Salivary, liver, and pancreas. Your digestive tract is also called your gastrointestinal tract or your alimentary canal. Correction, lagyan nyo ng L. Hindi po yan alimentary cana. Canal po yan. I'm very sorry for the typo. Forgive me. Ayan. Okay, so let's try to discuss the general structure of the digestive tract. It is a hollow lumen made of 4 layers. No? Pinakaloob is your mucosa, and then followed by your submucosa, your muscularis, which has your inner circular and outer longitudinal, and then your serosa, your our outermost layer of the GI tract. Let's begin with the mucosa. Your mucosa, syempre, nandyan ang epithelial lining, supported by your lamina propria. Dito, sa mucosa, may muscles. It's your muscularis mucosa. Okay, it is 18 layer of smooth muscle that separates your mucosa from your submucosa. Why? Your muscularis mucosa allows local movements of the mucosa. Okay, so again, mucosa tayo, ha? Next is your submucosa. Okay, so it contains a dense connective tissue. You have here, highly testable, your submucosal plexus. Submucosal is your Meissner plexus. And of course, a lot of your submucosal glands. Okay, other term, submucosal gland, a plexus, is your Meissner plexus. Then followed by your muscularis or your muscularis externa. It is composed of smooth muscles organized into your two sublayers. Your internal sublayer, which is circular, your external sublayer, which is longitudinal. Here, you will see the Auerbach plexus or your myenteric plexus, which coordinates the contraction of the muscularis muscle. Okay? Why? It propels and mixes the luminal contents forwardly. No? Kaya nga sabi nila, law of the gut, cephalocaudal. Okay? And then, important to note din yung enteric nervous system. For sure, na-discuss na isa inyo to. Your submucosal plexus and your myenteric plexus. Again, submucosal or Meissner, myenteric Auerbach plexus. That is the component of your ENS or enteric nervous system. Now, yung outermost layer is your serosa. Okay, this is a thin sheet of connective tissue. Again, cavity covered with mesothelium. Ang mesothelium ngayon ang outermost layer ng ating digestive tract. Okay? Pero ang serosa of your small and large intestine, they are continuous with the portion of your mesentery. Ano yung mesentery? Ayan yung large fold of your adipose connective tissue that will that covers your intestinal organs. It has your mesothelium. Okay? And it is continuous with the peritoneum. Now, speaking of serosa, your esophagus doesn't have one. Instead, meron siyang adventitia. Kasi usually, kapag may cavity ka, no, serosa. Pero kapag in connection with the surrounding tissues like your esophagus, meron kang adventitia. Remember that. Then let's move on to your oral cavity. Your oral cavity, syempre, for protection, it is stratified squamous epithelium. Depending on the location, ha? Kasi kung ito ay keratinized, nagkakalyo, hindi naman, mas madalas, no, your gingiva and hard palate. Okay? And then your partially keratinized, meron din. And your non-keratinized, like your soft palate, cheeks, floor of the mouth, and the pharynx or throat. Now your lips, the internal mucous surface of the lips is thick non-keratinized epithelium. Vermilion zone, nako, vermilion border, laging tinatanong. It's a very thin keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Ito yung transition between the oral mucosa and the skin, your vermilion border. And then you have your outer surface, sure ka na that it has a thin skin, okay? Epidermal and dermal layers, may sweat glands, and may ano na yan, follicles na, hair follicles. And syempre, usually kapag may hair follicle, you have your sebaceous glands or sebaceous glands. Now let's talk about tongue, baby. So your lingual papilla, we have your different forms of papilla here. Your filiform, which is pinakamarami and heavily keratinized. So in that sense, you know that the rough surface of this filiform papilla aids in the movement of food during chewing. Ngayon pa lang, sasabihin ko na sa inyo, ang filiform papilla ay walang taste buds. Ang meron lang is your fungiform and your foliate papilla. Fungiform, mushroom shape siya, no? Makukuha naman natin siya sa name, fungiform. And then your foliate papilla, it's in the side of the tongue and rudimentary in humans, especially in older individuals. Now, your valle naman or circumvalle, this is in front of the terminal sulcus and usually we have 8 to 12, no, forming a V in front of the sulcus terminalis. And this is the largest papilla. Visible yan, naked eye, hindi na kailangan ng microscope. Now, your taste buds, which is located in some of your papilla, okay, they are ovoid structure within a stratified epithelium on the tongue surface. They are located again in the fungiform and foliae, not in the filiform. Let's move on to your esophagus. You have your mucosa here. Okay, the lining epithelium here is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. By this time, dapat may hunch na kayo or may hunch nga, tama. May idea na kayo na every time na alam mo na yung lining is in contact with sabihin natin, abrasive materials, kailangan yung kanyang lining epithelium ay makapal, like your stratified squamous. Now, yung submucosa naman, it is a dense, irregular connective tissue, and usually naman sa submucosa, nandoon located yung mga glands. In this case, since we are in the esophagus, this is your esophageal glands. Then you have your muscularis externa. Okay, different muscle types ang meron sa esophagus depending on the location. Ito yung highly testable. Yung upper third natin, it is purely skeletal muscle. Remember that. Your middle third, mixed skeletal plus smooth. And your lower third, purely smooth muscle na siya. And then yung outermost layer is your adventitia. Okay, it is a loose connective tissue. And on the distal 1 to 2 centimeters of the esophagus, no, it is covered now with your serosa. Okay, so dito papasok yung mixture ng adventitia and serosa. Let's move on to your stomach. There are 4 major regions. Your cardia, okay, and then which has tubular glands with long pits into coiled secretory portion. Your pylorus is funnel-shaped region. The fundus is the dome. Okay, kaya siya dome shape, and most superior portion. Body is the majority of the stomach, and your stomach has a rugae. These are your longitudinally directed folds of the stomach. Now, ito yung pinaka-importante in histo. The mucosa or lining epithelium is simple columnar epithelium with gastric glands. Submucosa is dense connective tissue. Muscularis externa mo, you have 3. Usually, di ba, dalawa lang, inner circular, outer longitudinal. Sa stomach, meron kang outer longitudinal, innermost na oblique, and then you have your middle circular. Please take note of this. Now, the serosa, it is a loose connective tissue that covers the stomach and with mesothelium. Now, let's talk about the secretory epithelial cells of the stomach. Beginning with the gastric pit here, you can see the mucous neck cells. Your mucous neck cells, from the word itself, secretes your mucin. Then when we go down, you can see here your parietal cell or your zintic cell. This one naman secretes your intrinsic factor and your hydrochloric acid. And then going down, you also have your chief cells or your cymogenic or principal or peptic cells. Ang dami niyang name. Okay? It contains the granule of your pepsinogen, an inactive enzyme or cymogen, which kapag na-secrete and exposed into your acidic environment, it will become your pepsine. Your chief cells also produces your gastric lipase. Okay? And then you also have your enteroendocrine cells. Depending on the location, like in the fundus, you have there an enteroendocrine cells that secrete serotonin. In the pylorus naman, specifically your G cells produces your gastrin. So let's move on to your small intestine, the site for completion of digestive processes. We have the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, DJI. So let's talk about the mucosa. Important here, remember your plicae circularis. Your mucosa plus your submucosas is circular folds. No? So ayan yung tinatawag na plicae circularis. And when you go pag nag-zoom in pa tayo further, you will see a villi here. And in your villi, the same mucosal outgrowth. Depending on the area of the small intestine, nagbabago yung shape niya. For example, in the duodenum, it is leaf-like. In the jejunum, it's finger-like. And in the ileum, it's club-shaped. Okay? Important din, alam nyo, here in the vilus, dyan located yung lacteal or the central lymphatic. Important in the absorption of certain nutrients. Now, we also have what you call the intestinal glands, crypts or crypts of Lieberkühn. Buzzwords, tandaan yan. Okay, so here in the crypts of Lieberkühn, you will see a lot of differentiating cells and pluripotent stem cells. Okay, so like your enterocytes, which is responsible for the absorption of nutrients. And remember, on top of the enterocytes, may buhok sila covered with your microvilli. And this is what you call your brush border. And then you also have your goblet cells. Alam na natin yan, secretion of your mucus. Ang additional lang natin dito is the Paneth cells. They are cells important in the innate immunity and the regulation of the microenvironment of the intestinal crypts or crypts of Lieberkühn. Alright, and syempre, meron din mga enteroendocrine cells. Next to your mucosa, you have your submucosa. Depending on the location, like for example, in the duodenum, this you will see your duodenal glands. The buzzwords, your Brunner glands. Pag tinanong, it's in the submucosa of the duodenum. Your ileum naman, submucosal, you have your Peyer's patches, which is a MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. And then for the muscularis externa, inner circular, outer longitudinal. And nandiyan yung our back plexus, part of your enteric nervous system, and your serosa, which is a loose connective tissue. So move on tayo sa large intestines, more of the absorption of water and electrolytes. It forms your feces and a storage of your feces, specifically in the rectum. Marami siyang regions discussed in the abdominal part of the anatomy lectures, but you have here your short cecum, ileocecal valve, appendix, colon. Your colon has the ascending, transverse descending, sigmoid, and lastly, your rectum. Ano yung mga important notes here? Your mucosa in the large intestine lacks villi and or applica. Okay? It has no major folds except in the rectum. Okay? Because in the rectum, you have here rectal valve. And then, it has haustra or haustration. Okay, these are large sacs puckered in the wall of the colon. So these are your haustra, yon, yung mga space na yan. And then in between this haustra, you have your plicae seminariis. Okay, these are crescentic folds between your haustra. Again, plicae circularis, it's in the small intestine. Kapag naman plicae seminariis, it's in the large intestines. The mucosa of the large intestine is lined with simple columnar epithelium, okay, colonocytes with goblet cells. Then your submucosa, it's the dense irregular connective tissue. Muscularis externa, everybody take note, take note, take note. You have your outer longitudinal, and then you have a fiber of outer layer of muscles gathered in 3 separate longitudinal bands. And this is what you call your taenia coli. So dito mapapansin nyo rin, this is your taenia coli. Okay? Ayan din yung ginagamit na landmark for location of your appendix. And then, syempre, inner circular layers. Ngayon, ang adventitia or serosa covering nito, okay, serosa in transverse and sigmoid colon. Adventitia in ascending and descending. And then, you also have here yung mga adipose structure in the large intestine. This is what you call your appendices epiploicae, okay, or epiploic appendages. These are just adipose structure. Now, appendix is a mass of lymphoid tissue, the lamina propria and submucosa, especially in the young. No, in the appendix, there's a mass of lymphoid tissue in the lamina propria and submucosa. Okay, It has no taenia coli, kaya nga pag nawala bigla yung taenia coli, you're in the appendix already. It functions mainly as your mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Mostly immune ang function ng appendix, not part of the absorptive process of the GI tract. Now, your anal canal, you have your rectoanal junction. In this junction, you have your simple columnar mucosal lining, and then it will be replaced by your stratified squamous epithelium. More protection na kapag sa dulo. Then your mucosa and submucosa form several longitudinal folds, and these are your anal columns or your anal canals of Mercator. What is the mucosa of your anal canal? Upper half, you have your simple columnar with goblet cells. Lower half naman, stratified squamous non-keratinizing. Now, you have again your anal columns of Mergagni here. Ang muscularis mo, important, take note, upper half, inner circular layer, which forms the internal anal sphincter. In the lower half, it is a striated muscle already under voluntary control, external anal sphincter. Okay, so voluntary control, this one for the lower half, and then for the upper half, you have your internal anal sphincter. So let's move on to the organs associated with the digestive tract. We have here the different glands in your oral cavity. You have your parotid, submandibular, sublingual. Na-explain ko na to kanina, pero again, remember parotid is exclusively serous. Okay? And an excretory duct niya is tensens. And then you have your submandibular, which is primarily serous, with some mixed units of serous demilunes, excretory duct neto, Wharton's duct. And then your sublingual is primarily serous. Excretory duct niya ay Rivinus and your Bartoli. Your pancreas has 18 capsule and sends septa to form your lobules. Ang ductal system important now for the secretion of your pancreas. You have here your intercalated duct. These are cuboidal epithelium. Tapos, meron kang secretory acini, which occupies 98% of your pancreas, of the parenchyma of the pancreas. Your acinar cell now will secrete, okay, your exocrine secretions. And then, what is special here in the pancreas is you have your centroacinar cells, which is in connection with your intercalated duct. Now, you have your islets of Langerhans. These are your pancreatic islets. This is the endocrine portion. Kasi yung acini nyo, your acinar cells, these are your secretory acini. No, exocrine portion of the pancreas. Now, the pancreatic islets, they are masses of endocrine cells. And minute lang yung kanilang part of the organ volume, 1 to 2%. Mostly in the tail region, according to Hunckera. And originate as epithelial outgrowths of the gut endoderm. These are the different pancreatic cells. We have here your alpha or A cells. Okay, they secrete your glucagon. Then you have your beta or B cells. They are secreting insulin. Your delta or D cells, somatostatin, and then your pancreatic polypeptide cells or your F cells secretes your pancreatic polypeptide. Now, your liver is covered with your Gleason capsule with mesothelium ito. And your septa, like your pancreas, when it enters your porta hepatis, it's divided your parenchyma into your lobules. Ang cells of your liver is called hepatocytes. They are large binucleated eosinophilic epithelial cells with microvilli. And the blood flow in the liver is from periphery to center of each lobule. No, na-discuss naman ito kanina sa anatomy liver module nyo. Important here is it has a fenestrated endothelial cells. Buzzword space of this is a narrow perisinusoidal space. And you have here your stellate macrophages or Kupffer cells. These are your monocyte-derived macrophages. And then you have your hepatic stellate cells or ETO cells. Remember this. Your ETO cells, parang storage lang siya. It's a lipid droplets which store your vitamin A and other fat-soluble vitamins. And then you have your portal triad. Ano ba yung portal triad? A venial branch of the portal vein, an arterial branch, and your small bile ductules. So venial, arterial, and bile ductules. Now for the liver, also important yung bile production and flow. It starts with your bile canaliculi. no? That is from the apex of your hepatocytes. Now, apical surface of your hepatocytes, it will become your bile canaliculi, and then it will go to the canals of Hering. Your canals of Hering is composed of your cholangiocytes. And then together, from the canals of Hering emerging into the portal areas, it will now become your bile ductules, which is a bigger duct. Okay, so that's the end of the discussion of your organs associated with digestion. Pag-usapan natin ngayon respiratory system. So, again, dapat alam na alam nyo to yung functional division, conducting portion and respiratory portion. Conducting portion, it conditions and humidifies the air and bring it into the lungs. Ito yung mga part na yon, from the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and terminal bronchioles. Nagkakaroon lang ng gas exchange at the respiratory portion. This is from Junquera, respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. Now, the respiratory system, ang kanyang mucosa, no, pinaka-importante, ito yung kumbaga, this is the pearl, the mother pearl of histology. No? The lining epithelium is a pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells, and it's in the mucosa. The submucosa is a loose connective tissue containing mixed glands. Then you have a cartilage layer. Usually, ano yon? Most common cartilage or hyaline cartilage plus smooth muscle. And then here you have your outer covering, which is an adventitia. It is a layer of your fibroelastic connective tissue merging within the surroundings of your respiratory tract. Starting with your nasal cavity, you have your vestibule. Okay, this is your nasal vestibule lined by a stratified squamous non-keratinizing epithelium. Diyan, meron kang mga hairs that filter out the particulate material from inspired air. This is your vibrissae. Then you have your nasal cavity. Your nasal cavity, you have your nasal septum that separates the nasal cavities into two chambers, the left and the right. Then you have your concha, which is a bony shelf-like projections in the lateral wall of the nasal cavities. Now, most of the nasal cavities and the conducting portion of the respiratory system is lined with mucosa having ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Pinakamarami dyan yung ciliated columnar cells. Then, your mucous goblet cells. Then, you have your brush cells. These are columnar cells with microvilli. And these are sensory receptor cells, specifically your chemosensory receptor, which identify harmful substances in the epithelium. Then you have your small granule cells. Buzzwords, your Kolchitzi cells, part of the diffuse neuroendocrine system. Then you have your basal cells, no? Usually naman, pag basal cells, they have the capacity to give rise to another epithelial cells. So this is your progenitor cell, basal cells. Important in the region of your nasal cavity is your olfactory region, because in the olfactory region, that's where your olfactory mucosa, which houses your olfactory epithelium. Grabe naman, dami naman olfactory nun. Okay? So this is the receptor organ for smell, located at the roof of the nasal fossa, anatomically the superior concha, and lined by your pseudostratified columnar epithelium without goblet cells. Now, your olfactory epithelium, there are different cell types. Your olfactory cells or your olfactory neurons, they are bipolar neurons. Then you have your basal cells. These are stem cells ready for the replacement of your olfactory neurons and support cells. Your supporting cells or your sustentacular cells, they are, they have light yellow pigment responsible for the color of the olfactory mucosa. And then your Bowman's gland or your olfactory gland. This is produces your mucus to moisten the olfactory epithelium. And important yung moist na yun in order to trap odoriferous material or odor-containing gases. Now, alveoli, important, we have two types. Your type 1 alveolar cells or your type 1 pneumocytes. They are squamous alveolar cells, and they make up about 95% of the alveolar lining. Main role is to provide a barrier of minimal thickness that is readily permeable to gas. Next is your type 2 alveolar cells or type 2 pneumocytes or septal cells. O, diba? These are interspersed among the type 1 alveolar cells. They are cuboidal versus type 1 as squamous, and they secrete your material pulmonary surfactant. Let's go to the skin. The outermost layer is your epidermis. Your epidermis is a stratified squamous keratinized epithelium, and you also have a lot of your epidermal cells, your keratinocytes, melanocytes, Langerhans cells, and your Merkel cell. Remember your Langerhans cells? This is also a part of your mononuclear macrophage system. Now, your epidermis has different layers. You have your stratum corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basale. Basale again, basal, progenitor cells for all the epidermal layers. Ako, mnemonic ko dito personally is kulugo sa batok. Corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basale. Next to your epidermis, you have your dermis. Okay, so it binds your epidermis to your subcutaneous tissue or hypodermis. And your dermis varies within the region of the body. Ang pinakamakapal na dermis sa likod, back. Okay, so what is the layers of the dermis? You have your thin papillary layer and your thick reticular layer. Now, your hypodermis or your subcutaneous tissue or the superficial fascia, it contains your adipocytes or adipose cells. It is a loose connective tissue and it has a lot of vascularity. And usually this is the site of route of administration for insulin. Okay? Okay, ngayon pag-usapan natin ang urinary system. Okay, so let's focus on the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle contains your top of your glomerular capillaries. No, this is where your filtration happens, and your capillaries is surrounded by your Bowman capsule. It's a double wall capsule. Your Bowman capsule has a polarity. Then, when we talk about your vascular polarity, we talk about the afferent arteriole and your efferent arteriole. So, these are yung entrance, sa efferent naman yung exit. We also have the tubular pole, no, where your proximal convoluted tubule begins. This one. Now, your Bowman capsule has an internal visceral layer that is closely enveloping the glomerular capillaries. And there are your capillaries here are fenestrated. Remember the type of capillaries, and then you have your outer parietal layer which forms the surface of the capsule. Now, between of that, you have your CS or capsular urinary space, which receives the fluid that is filtered by the glomerulus. Let's talk about more of the inner visceral layer kasi dito maraming pathology. So you have your podocytes. Your podocytes are unusual stellate epithelial cells and they compose the apparatus of the renal filtration together with the capillary endothelial cells. They have the primary processes, your primary processes here, okay, of your podocyte. Ito mas malaki na to. And then you have your secondary processes or your pedicels. They are interdigitating secondary processes. This one covers much more of the capillary surface and in direct contact with the basal lamina. Now you have here your filtration sleeves. These are between the interdigitating pedicels ng ating mga podocytes. And microscopically using electron microscopy, before your filtration sleeves, you have here your covering, which is your slit diaphragm. Okay? Important also in the filtration barrier. Let's talk about your glomerular filtration barrier. So, ang component nun, you have the fenestration of the capillary endothelium, this one. And then you have your thick basal lamina or your glomerular basement membrane, this one. And the third component is the filtration slit diaphragms between your pedicels. So this is a summary of the histologic features of the different regions within the renal tubules. So please take note yung mga regions ng tubule and the location, kung sino yung cortex, like your PCT and your distal convoluted tubules. Now your loop of Henle is in the medulla, okay, and then your thick ascending limb is in the medullary rays together with your intercalated cells and your principal cells. Important, again, lining epithelium as emphasized earlier with the different types of epithelium. You have your stratified urothelium or your transitional epithelium or urothelium. This is the one that lines your ureter, bladder. May three layers yan. You have your small basal cells, okay? Then you have your cuboidal or locolumnar. And lastly, yung ating mga umbrella cells, which are dome-shaped. Now, the urethra, important, no? Sa male urethra, it has three segments. Your prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and your spongy urethra. Yung prostatic urethra nyo, urothelium pa. Pero ang membranous urethra nyo, it's stratified columnar and pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Ang spongy urethra nyo, magbabago na rin. It is similar to your membranous urethra, pero may stratified squamous epithelium na in the distal, near to the tip of the penis. How about your female urethra? Well, the reason why sinabi siyang exclusively urinary because the urethra of the male, no, responsible also with the ejaculation of the penis, of the sperm. Now here in the female urethra, it is quite short, 3 to 5 centimeters. This one lined with transitional epithelium. Hindi katulad ng male na nagbabago-bago depending on the location of the urethra. And it transitions to a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Now, let's talk about the endocrine system. Last part na ito, guys, kapit lang, promise. So, important here is your pituitary gland. This is also known as your hypophysis or hypophysis cerebri. There are two regions, no? Your anterior pituitary and your posterior pituitary gland. Your neurohypophysis is your posterior pituitary gland. Your adenohypophysis is your anterior pituitary gland. It is connected to your hypothalamus through your infundibulum stalk or your infundibular stalk. Alright? And then, your neurohypophysis has two parts. Your pars nervosa and the infundibular stalk or infundibulum. Now, the pars nervosa is responsible for the secretion of your stored hormones. Again, stored ang ating keyword here. There are two important cells in your pars nervosa, your pituicytes, the most abundant cell, and your neurosecretory bodies or your Herring bodies. So, pag narinig ang Herring bodies, it is in your pituitary gland. Okay, so cell in this region do not synthesize hormones. It only stores them. Why? Because the hormone released by your neurohypophysis are synthesized by the two nuclei in your hypothalamus. Your ADH synthesized by your supraoptic nuclei. But of course, meron din naman konti from paraventricular. Mainly from your supraoptic. And then your oxytocin secreted by the paraventricular nuclei and konti from your supraoptic nuclei. Ayun yung pinaka-importanting part doon. Now, your anterior pituitary gland is located with three parts. Your pars cystalis, which is 75% for adenohypophysis. Then you have your pars tuberalis and your pars intermedia. Now, there are two cell types in your adenohypophysis. You have your chromophobes, takot sa kulay, and your chromophils. Love na love ang color. Okay, well, from the word itself, chromophobes, they stain pearly, and then your chromophils naman, okay, they stain well. So what are the two types here ng chromophils natin? Those are staining. We have the acidophils, pinkish stain, and your basophil or your bluish stain. Sa acidophils, we have your somatotroph. Okay, 50% of cells, these are your somatotrophine. And then for your lactotroph, also known as your mammotrophs, 15 to 20% of cells which secretes your prolactin. Now your basophil here, no, we have your gonadotroph, thyrotroph, and your corticotroph. Ang ating mnemonic here is your flat pig for your FSH, LH, your ACTH, and your TSH. Okay, ang meaning ng ICSH, please take note, is your interstitial cell stimulating hormone, commonly seen yan in men. Okay, and your LPH is only your lipotropin. Again, ICSH, kung first time nyo lang marinig or mabasa, it's your interstitial cell stimulating hormone, mostly seen in men. And your LPH is your lipotropin. While your ACTH is your adrenal corticotropin. Now let's move on to your thyroid gland. Your thyroid gland has your thyroid follicle. Your thyroid follicle is made up of your simple cuboidal epithelium. They are called your follicular cells or your thyrocytes. So pag narinig yung word na thyrocytes, it's simply your thyroid follicle. Now, your thyrocytes can change their shape depending on the activity level of the thyroid. Pag cuboidal, that is the normal shape. Kapag less active, squamous. Pag more active, more to lower columnar in shape. Your thyrocytes and your follicular cells surround a lumen, and inside the lumen there is a gelatinous acidophilic substance which we call colloid, kung saan nakasuspend doon yung ating mga thyroid hormones. Important also in your thyroid gland is your parafollicular or C cell. This is the one that secretes your calcitonin. Remember, going back to calcium physiology, your calcitonin tones down your calcium and it inhibits your osteoclast activity. Now, your parathyroid gland, it is a four small ovoid masses on the posterior part of the thyroid gland. It is embedded on the thyroid gland capsule, but has a connective tissue capsule separate from the thyroid gland. So it contains what? Your principal, chief cells, and oxyphil cells. So your principal cells or your chief cells, they are cytoplasmic granules that contains your parathyroid hormone. So principal cell secretes your PTH. So remember the effects of your PTH, diba? It increases your blood calcium levels. Contradictory to that is your parafollicular or C cells, which secretes calcitonin, tones down naman your calcium level. Now, it also acts on your osteoblasts, which then stimulates osteoclasts to increase its activity. Kaya bone resorption, nafe-free yung calcium. Your calcium reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubules, no, and inhibits the reabsorption naman of phosphate in the proximal convoluted tubule in the kidneys. It indirectly increases the calcium absorption in small intestine by stimulating your vitamin D action. Well, review in physiology, but important in histology, you know what's the secretion of your principal cells or your chief cells. Your oxyphil cells, they are lesser in number and they are seen more in the older individuals. They are larger, as almost the same or much larger than the principal cells, and they are degenerated derivative of your principal cells. Remember that. Next is your adrenal gland. Two areas. You have your cortex and your medulla. Cortex, there are three concentric zones. This is your glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. No? Ang ating mnemonic here is go find Rex, mate good sex. So yung glomerulosa nyo secretes your mineralocorticoids, your fasciculata, glucocorticoids, and your reticularis, your weak androgens. Now, in the adrenal medulla, importantly here is your chromatin cells, which secretes your epinephrine and your norepinephrine. Major function, already discussed in physiology. Now, your pineal gland, important here, you know the other term, your epiphysis cerebri, baka malito kayo. Function niya, regulation of the daily rhythm of bodily activities, circadian rhythm. We have the cell here, your pinealocytes. They are modified neurons and they secrete your melatonin. Melatonin is from tryptophan. Then you also have here your interstitial cells. Buzzwords, no? They're found from the pineal gland. They have the comma shape. Okay, and then pinaka highly testable is your corpora arenacea, also known as your brain sand or Samomas bodies. No, your corpora arenacea is from the pineal gland. No, ako ang natatandaan ko, arena of pines. So corpora arena, pines, pineal gland. Alright? Kasi may isa na corpora amylacea na makikita naman natin sa prostate gland. Ang mnemonic ko naman doon, si Amila, no, loves the prostate. Yan. Sige. Move on na tayo sa male reproductive system. Na-discuss na rin naman ito partially sa ating anatomy, but we'll focus more on the testes. No? This is the male gonads. Function is formation of sperm or your male gamete. Okay? And your testis is the site of synthesis and secretion of your testosterone. In your testes, you have your interstitial tissue. And during puberty, your interstitial cells or your Leydig cells produces your testosterone. So we also have your seminiferous tubules. This is the site of sperm production. And usually your seminiferous tubules here All right, it is linked to a straight tubule. This is the straight tubule, and then going to the ret T testis or the mediastinum testis. Ayun yung kanyang flow. Baka lang matanong. So, una muna yung seminiferous tubules, and then you have your straight tubules, and then you have your reti testis. Your reti testis or ret testis is a labyrinth, no, pasikot-sikot of epithelium line channels that is embedded in the mediastinum testis, which houses your reti testis. Okay? Now, these are the different cells of your seminiferous tubule. You have your myoid cells, which allow recontraction of the tubule. Your Sertoli cells, these are nurse cells. Nurse cells, okay, and which part of the establishment of the blood testis barrier. And you also have the dividing cells of the spermatogenic lineage. Okay, now your epididymis is a highly cord serving as a temporary storage of sperm. Okay, it has three regions, your head, body, and tail. Okay, so dito makikita nyo in the body of the epididymis, this is where your sperm cells undergo further subtle modification, and in the tail, storage of sperm until ejaculation. Now, the modification of sperm in the epididymis, no, is important because this is where your sperm develop the competence for forward motility, modification of the acrosome, the organization of the cell membrane surrounding the sperm head, addition of your cholesterol and decapitation factors which block acrosomal reaction. Now, your capacitation, vocabulary lang natin, refers to the fertilizing ability of the sperm occurs in the female genital tract. That's your capacitation. Now, your accessory glands, we have here your seminal vesicles. Provide the fluid making up the 70% of the semen. This is the major contributor of semen. Has three major components, baka matanong. Fructose, major source of energy for for energy. And then you have your prostaglandins, which dapat ganito yan, guys. Ha? Fructose, prostaglandins, and fibrinogen. Again, hatiin nyo. Yung three components, fructose for energy, prostaglandins for muscular activity of the female reproductive tract, and then your fibrinogen for coagulation after ejaculation. Kasi nga, it protects the sperm from the external environment. Again, your FFP, fructose, fibrinogen, and your prostaglandin. Now, your prostate gland, it has different zones, no? In surgery, you will talk about this again, anatomy na explain na konti ni Doc Kurt, okay? But remember here that you have your mucosal glands, submucosal glands, and main glands in the different zone. Ayun yung histowise na important. So ito, yung buzzwords natin, your corpora amylacea. These are small spherical concretions. They are partially calcified. No, mukha siyang corpora arenacea, pero different lang yung location. Okay, it is normally present in the lumens of the many prostatic tubuloocerinary glands. They are containing deposited glycoproteins and keratan sulfate. Mas dumarami yan when your prostate ages. And sabi naman nila, there's no physiologic or clinical significance pagdating sa corpora amylacea. Again, review, corpora arenacea, it's from the pineal gland. Corpora amylacea, it's from the prostate gland. Okay? Then we have here prostate-specific antigen. It is a serine protease. Kasi baka pag narinig yung PSA, automatic pumapasok sa inyo prostate cancer, di ba? Pero your prostate-specific antigen helps liquefy coagulated semen for the slow release of sperm after ejaculation. And usually, there's a small amount of PSA leaks to the prostatic vasculature, and that is normal. Pero yung elevated circulating PSA will indicate an abnormal glandular mucosa, typically of inflammation, prostatitis, or prostatic carcinoma. Alright, now let's move on to the last topic, your female reproductive system. Congratulations, no? So, na-discuss to sa, this will be discussed again to OB na daanan siya ni Ana Cruz sa female repro, pero importante dito yung transformation zone, no? Ayun yung junction between the columnar and squamous epithelia. So, this is your transformation zone. And the mucosa here, we have the endocervical, which is lined by simple columnar epithelium with cervical glands. And then your ectocervix naman, no, it is a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So from columnar to squamous. Kasi nga ayun yung ectocervix in contact with the outside environment, kaya kailangan ng protection. Kaya ang kanyang lining epithelium is stratified squamous. Now, the uterine tubes have heavily folded mucosa with secretory PEG cells. So, PEG cells, it's from the uterine tubes. You have the different layer, mucosa muscularis and serosa. So, mucosa, doon makikita ang secretory PEG cells. And then your muscularis, interwoven circular and longitudinal muscle layers. Your serosa, okay, your visceral peritoneum with mesothelium. Your primordial follicles are formed, remember, during fetal life, while primary, iba ang primordial sa primary. Primordial, very old, no, talagang fetal life. Primary naman, during puberty. Now, your mammary gland changes with age and pregnancy. So, these are the different stages. Nice to know ito, basahin lang. Important to note is your WBC infiltration, early middle pregnancy. Important yan. So that's the end of our quick review covering the whole book of Hungera. Thank you so much for staying with me, and I know this is a quick review and hopefully nabigyan kayo ng konting push and confidence in knowing and reviewing some important histology concepts. So thank you so much for listening and good luck. Happy Aral. God bless. Bye-bye.